How does that
No,
look?
I'm not saying that. You get some sense that there's a handful of stocks.
Look at that. I mean, you could tie that to the market. Bang.
Most beloved rocker of all time. Where you go?
John Bonham.
Come on, man. Come on. I mean, yes, but no. I mean, you could hit me with the John Lennon. You could hit me with Bob Dylan. You could even hit me with maybe a Jimmy Page. But I mean, when you think of the legacy of kind of rock stars and rock music, I mean, I think there's one place to go. Where do you think I'm going?
Absolutely. You know, you're 100% right. The Big Bopper.
All right, I see what you're doing here. The King,
No.
the
Oh,
King,
the
and
King.
again,
So I'm sorry.
and I'm not,
apologize.
I'm not talking about Burger King. I'm obviously talking about the King. I'm talking about Elvis, the man from Memphis, the man who really, let's face it, I think probably brought rock and roll into America's living rooms.
No question about it. You know, I'm reading Bruce Springsteen's book, and he says flat out that when he saw Elvis in his living room on the Ed Sullivan Show, it changed his life.
It's so hard to think that people had never seen people move like that. Like again, he was Elvis the pelvis, man. He was gyrating, man. He was doing his thing, and he piled it high up front, man. I've thought about piling it high. I mean, I get a little product in the lid, man. I could throw a little pompadour up there,
I was
whatever.
going to say they call that a pompadour, and I think one of the reasons we have the King up is this week in 1970, 51 years ago, there was a chance meeting, and it was a bit of a chance meeting between Elvis Presley and then President Richard Nixon. I mean, think about
Oof.
that.
How did that come together? Because again, I can't think of two guys that would probably rather you know be farther apart than those two on either side. I'm not sure. I mean, like Nixon wouldn't know what to do with Elvis, and I think Elvis would just hold on, hello Richard, and just kind of be on his way. That was it's a decent Elvis, right?
That's a very
Nice.
decent Elvis. Listen, I think there's probably folklore behind it. I think a mutual friend of the president and Elvis somehow put it together, probably a quiet week at the White House. And Elvis strolled in, the black gabardine suit, looking really cool with the most uncool person, maybe in the history of politics, Richard Nixon. It's just such an unlikely pairing, but it made for a great photograph.
If you think about some of these meetings between I see there's different ways we could go with this now. You could bring up companies that have unlikely pairings and people that don't really belong together but somehow have been forced together, or you could bring up the dynamic where you have Washington forcing their way into Wall Street, and so to me, I think that's more apropos. I think of a forced gathering between Nixon and Elvis as asking the heads of the biggest tech companies in the world to appear at a Senate congressional hearing down in Washington. And it's a folly. I mean, nobody knows what they're talking about. No one's even in a position to have an intellectual conversation about this. And I think actually both sides kind of lose.
Did you like the cape-wearing 1970s Elvis, or were you more the late 50s, 1960s Elvis, the GI Elvis, the somewhat clean-cut yet still Jim Dean type Elvis?
Dude, he was dashing. He was smooth. He set style. I don't know what was going on in the late 70s. I really don't. I mean, the bejeweled white leather bell bottoms parachuting out of obviously the flying Elvises and things. The caricature that is Elvis today, which is Fat Elvis, which is Vegas Elvis, is not the Elvis I know, Guy Adami. I'm sorry.
That's exactly right. And we talked about unlikely pairings, and there was one the summer of 2016, if memory serves, and they announced that Microsoft bought LinkedIn for an astronomical number at the time, still is to this day, but it was $26 billion. And we looked at each other like, what? What's going on there?
Well, so who's Elvis and who's Nixon there? I mean, I realize that they don't belong together, but we need to stay consistent with our metaphor here. Who's who?
Well, and subsequently, they do belong together, and maybe Richard Nixon and Elvis did, as unlikely a pairing as that was, maybe we needed that pairing at the time, and we're still talking about it 51 years later. And truth be told, Microsoft was a genius to buy LinkedIn, and maybe LinkedIn was smart to pair up with Microsoft. So as crazy as it sounded at the time, both those situations, maybe it was best for all four parties in retrospect.
Well, it was. I'm going to ask a different question, and I think this is fair. Who's been more important to the history of America, Elvis or Microsoft? I mean, if you
Wow.
think about it, like depending on who you ask, you're going to get someone who is adamant, who's vociferous, who's vehement. Like, oh, are you kidding me? It's Elvis. It's not even close. Elvis defined an era. Elvis defined a sense of righteousness, a sense of being proud and but pushing a little bit against the authority. I mean, Elvis, he was a symbol. I mean, Microsoft, yeah, I guess.
Elvis kicked the door open for everybody that came after him, including, by the way, the exalted Beatles. And I think the Beatles will admit that as well. So I think Elvis sits atop. Elvis is, as they say, he's in the Parthenon of rock and roll, of music.
Yeah, he's in the Parthenon. He's hopefully he's not in the Acropolis. And again, that Parthenon of corporate America. Look, at this point, it's got to be Apple when you consider the fact that Apple walks around. You're probably listening to some Elvis on your Spotify list off your iPhone if you've stepped up with the technology. But it's the unlikely pairings of a Nixon and an Elvis, or a Microsoft and a LinkedIn, that ultimately tells you, I think, the direction of this country, which is that let's throw it together, let's see what happens, and we all belong as one guy. So even if one of us was going to be Nixon, one of us is going to be Elvis. How would you cast that?
Oh, you're Elvis for sure, and I'm Nixon. Take us out here, Tim Seymour.
Well, Guy, don't be cruel. Don't be cruel. We are Commercial Break. I'm Tim Seymour. He's Guy Adami. Where can you find us, roughly?
Every week, you can see us at the airports, the lounges, any place in the airport. We're there. Reach TV, typically at 6, but all day long, Tim.
Commercial Break. Talk to you soon.